Attach's Zanish's fourth set of arms twitched nervously as he stood before the High Command Chamber's massive doors. This would be his final attempt to prevent what he believed would become the greatest military disaster in the hegemony's history. After 3 solar cycles of warnings, petitions, and increasingly desperate presentations, he had one last chance to stop tomorrow's invasion of Earth. The doors parted with a soft hiss. 8 members of the High Command sat around the crystalline strategy table, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the artificial light. General Vexmore, his scales an impressive shade of command purple, didn't even look up from the holographic display of Earth rotating above the table's center. Attach, Vexmore's voice carried the weight of infinite boredom. I trust you have something new to present. Something beyond your usual concerns. Zanish stepped forward, all 6 of his eyes fixed on the holographic Earth. Respected members of the High Command, I implore you one final time to reconsider this invasion. Earth is not merely another conquest waiting to happen. It is a Class 12 death world. Admiral Weichtal chittered in amusement. Yes, the highest classification in our database. You've mentioned this in every presentation, because it matters. Zanish's voice rose with urgency. He gestured with his upper arms, and the hologram zoomed into the landing zone. The Amazon rainforest is not simply terrain to be traversed. It is one of the deadliest regions on an already deadly world. He brought up footage of Earth's predators. A tiger taking down prey 3 times its size. A Komodo dragon's bacteria-laden bite bringing down a water buffalo. A swarm of mosquitoes carrying diseases that had killed more humans than all their wars combined. Commander Zek's tool waved a dismissive appendage. We are deploying 2.3 million of our finest warriors, equipped with energy weapons that can vaporize any of these creatures. Our medical technology can handle any primitive biological threats, Admiral Weichtal added. Zanish's throat sacs pulsed with frustration. These humans haven't even achieved unified planetary government. He tried a different approach. Have you asked yourselves why? How can a species survive on a world that would kill any of us within days without technological support, yet remain so divided? Because they are primitive, General Vexmore finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. Their disunity proves their weakness. No, Zanish's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Their disunity proves their strength. Each human culture has adapted to survive in conditions we would consider unsurvivable. They don't control their world. They've learned to thrive within its constraints. And you're about to land our forces in a region so hostile that even they haven't fully tamed it after thousands of years. The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then General Vexmore stood, his full height impressive even for a military caste member. Your concern for our troops is noted, attaché, but the invasion will proceed as planned. You are dismissed. Zanish's arms all dropped to his sides in defeat. As he turned to leave, he remembered a human expression he'd discovered during his research: nature always wins. Tomorrow, 2.3 million warriors would learn exactly what that meant. He only hoped someone would survive to record what happened. The loading of the invasion force was a spectacle that would have impressed even the most hardened military observer. From his observation platform, Attaché Zanish watched the endless streams of troops filing into their drop ships, their environmental suits gleaming with that peculiar sheen of new equipment never tested in real combat. 2.3 million warriors, the largest invasion force ever assembled in the hegemony's history. Their suits alone had cost more than the annual economic output of 3 core worlds. Each soldier carried weapons that could reduce Earth's primitive tanks to slag, armor that could theoretically withstand the vacuum of space, and medical systems that could heal almost any wound. General Vexmore stood on the command deck of the flagship, his scales now shifted to the deep gold of anticipated victory. He was giving another speech about glory and destiny, his voice booming through the massive landing bay. Today we bring another world into the embrace of the hegemony. These humans, who cannot even unite their own planet, will learn the meaning of true civilization. The troops chittered in appreciation, their armor clicking as they shifted in formation. Zanish noticed how many of them had decorated their suits with kill markers from previous conquests. Empty spaces had been deliberately left for the marks they expected to add on Earth. He couldn't stay silent any longer. Making his way through the crowd, Zanish approached the general's platform. Sir, I beg one final moment of your time. Vexmore's secondary eyes swiveled toward him while his primary set remained fixed on the troops. Attach, your persistence would be admirable if it weren't becoming tiresome. The environmental suits, sir, they haven't been tested in conditions like Earth's rainforest. The humidity alone can penetrate vacuum-sealed armor. Vexmore's laugh was copied by his surrounding officers. The suits can withstand the void of space, attaché. I doubt a little rain will pose a problem. It's not just rain, sir. The entire ecosystem is enough. All four of Vexmore's eyes now locked onto Zanish. You've made your position clear. Now observe your station and witness how the hegemony deals with primitive worlds. A junior officer approached, his scales flickering with excitement. Sir, the first wave is ready for launch. 200,000 drop ships awaiting your command. Vexmore raised all four arms in a gesture of triumph. Begin the deployment. By this time tomorrow, we'll be accepting Earth's surrender. Zanish watched the first wave of ships descend toward the blue-green planet below. The troops called it a little ball of water. He knew better. It was a fortress that had spent billions of years perfecting its defenses, and they were about to learn the hard way that their technology meant nothing to a world that had been killing things since before their species evolved. As the ships disappeared into Earth's atmosphere, Zanish found himself remembering another human phrase he'd discovered in his research: pride goes before a fall. The fall, he feared, was about to be spectacular. The first signs of disaster came within hours of landing. Zanish stood in the flagship's command center, watching as the holographic display of the invasion force began showing anomalies. Red warning indicators started appearing over landing zones, first a few dozen, then hundreds, then thousands. Report. General Vexmore's scales had shifted from victory gold to a sickly green-gray. A communications officer's appendages flew over his console. Sir, we're losing contact with multiple drop ships. Environmental sensors are, sir, they're reporting complete failures. Zanish stepped closer to the holographic display, his throat sacs constricting at the sight. 30% of the landing craft were already showing critical system failures. The humidity of Earth's rainforest was playing havoc with their supposedly superior technology. Equipment rated for the vacuum of space was proving useless against the simple combination of heat and water vapor. Impossible, Vexmore hissed. Those are our most advanced ships. A new wave of emergency signals flooded the command center. The first ground forces were reporting in, and their messages made Zanish's exoskeleton crawl. Command, this is Drop Zone 7. The ground is swallowing us. We've lost 2 platoons already. This is Zone 12. The terrain is unstable. We're sinking, the transmission cut off in a burst of static. Zone 23 reporting. We've lost contact with our forward units. The scanners can't penetrate this canopy, and there's some kind of electromagnetic interference. The reports kept coming. Entire squadrons disappearing into quicksand. Elite units being swept away by flash floods that appeared from nowhere. Drop ships sinking into what looked like solid ground only to discover it was a camouflaged bog. The planet seemed to be actively fighting back, using weapons that none of their advanced technology could counter. Sir, a senior medical officer burst into the command center, his scales pale with stress. The environmental suits are failing. The humidity is causing seal degradation, and the internal systems are shorting out. Troops are being exposed to the atmosphere. Vexmore slammed all 4 arms onto the command console. They're rated for vacuum. How can they fail in mere air? Because it's not mere air, Zanish spoke softly. It's air carrying millions of microscopic spores, bacteria, and fungi. Life forms that have evolved for billions of years to break down everything from fallen trees to carrion, including, it seems, our advanced polymers. As if to emphasize his point, another wave of emergency signals lit up the display. This time they were medical alerts. Thousands of troops were reporting respiratory distress, skin infections, and mysterious fevers. Their superior immune systems, evolved for the sterile environments of space, were proving defenseless against Earth's microscopic arsenal. This is impossible, Vexmore whispered, all 4 eyes fixed on the casualty numbers that were climbing with terrifying speed. We haven't even engaged the humans yet. We haven't fired a single shot. We don't need to engage the humans, Zanish replied, watching as another sector of drop zones went dark. The planet is engaging us. And we're losing. The command center fell silent except for the constant ping of emergency signals. In just the first day of the invasion, they had lost contact with over 400,000 troops. Not to human weapons or tactics, but to the simple, implacable forces of nature that had ruled this death world since before humans walked upon it. And night hadn't even fallen yet. Through the massive view screens, Zanish could see storm clouds gathering over the landing zones. The atmospheric sensors were registering levels of electrical activity that would overwhelm their communications systems. Soon they would be fighting blind. General, he said quietly, I suggest we consider evacuation while we still can, because what we're seeing now, this is just Earth's greeting. Wait until it decides to actually fight back. By the third day, the invasion force's medical facilities were overwhelmed. Zanish stood in the flagship's primary treatment center, his scales pulled tight against his body in horror as he watched the endless stream of casualties arriving from the surface. The massive chamber, designed to handle combat injuries from energy weapons and explosives, was instead filled with troops suffering from something far more insidious. Their scales had turned black with fever, their breathing labored, their bodies racked with tremors. "It's the smallest ones that are killing us," the chief medical officer reported, her usual professional detachment cracking. "These mosquitoes. They're barely visible to our eyes, yet they're decimating our forces more effectively than any weapon we've ever encountered." Zanish watched as another warrior was rushed in, his environmental suit torn open in desperate attempts to lower his body temperature. The soldier's scales were practically melting from the fever. How are they bypassing our defenses? General Vexmore demanded, his own scales flickering between rage red and fear gray. "These are the finest environmental suits ever created." The medical officer activated a holographic display, showing a magnified image of a mosquito. "They're proboscis, what they use to feed. It's perfectly evolved to find microscopic gaps in any armor. And once they do," she paused, bringing up another image that made several officers step back in alarm. "These parasites they carry, these plasmodium organisms that cause what humans call malaria, they multiply in our bloodstream. Our immune systems have never encountered anything like them." "But that's just one disease," Vexmore protested weakly. "Surely our medical technology, dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika virus, chikungunya." The medical officer's voice grew increasingly desperate as she listed them. "Each one delivered by these insects, each one devastating to our biology. And our database suggests there are hundreds more we haven't even encountered yet." A junior medical technician burst into the room, his scales practically white with panic. "Sir, the filtration systems in the field hospitals, they're failing. The humidity is growing cultures of something called aspergillus in the air processors." Zanish watched as the casualty numbers on the main display continued to climb. Nearly 500,000 troops were now incapacitated by disease alone. The mosquitoes had accomplished in 3 days what the most advanced military forces in the galaxy couldn't do in centuries of warfare. "How?" Vexmore whispered, all 4 eyes fixed on a writhing soldier whose scales had turned almost completely black. "How do the humans survive this?" "They almost didn't," Zanish replied softly. "Their historical records show that these diseases have killed more humans than all their wars combined. But over countless generations, they adapted. They developed immunities, created medicines, learned to live with these threats." He gestured to the suffering troops around them. "We thought our technology made us superior. But these insects, they've been perfecting their weapons for millions of years longer than we've existed." A new alarm blared through the medical bay. More casualties were arriving, but this time with different symptoms. The medical officer's scales went pale as she read the incoming reports. "Sir, we're seeing signs of something new. The troops are calling it flesh-eating bacteria. It's entering through the smallest breaks in their scales, and our antibiotics are useless against it." Vexmore turned all 4 eyes to Zanish. "These diseases, this was what you were trying to warn us about." "This is just the beginning," Zanish replied grimly. "These are only the threats we can see. Earth's arsenal includes millions of different bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. Each one evolved specifically to survive and spread in this environment. And we just delivered 2.3 million perfect hosts directly into their hunting grounds." Through the medical bay's viewport, they could see more transport ships arriving from the surface, each one filled with troops who had never fired their weapons, never engaged a human defender, yet had been completely defeated by enemies too small to see. The mighty invasion force of the hegemony was being undone by insects and microbes. And somewhere on the planet below, Zanish knew, billions more mosquitoes were taking flight in the evening air, seeking new victims with their unerring hunger for blood. Nature's smallest soldiers were winning the war, and they hadn't even noticed they were fighting one. While disease ravaged the invasion force from within, the larger denizens of Earth's rainforest began their own campaign of terror. Zanish reviewed the footage from recovered helmet cameras, each recording more horrifying than the last. A squad of elite warriors, their scales still proud purple, despite their fever, disappeared one by one into the underbrush. The last recording showed a glimpse of spotted yellow fur, a flash of massive teeth, and then static. The Jaguars had learned that the aliens' motion sensors couldn't track them through the dense foliage, and they hunted accordingly. Another battalion lost contact in Sector 7. A communications officer reported. His scales a mottled pattern of stress. Last transmission mentioned something called an anaconda. They said it was squeezing right through their reinforced armor. Zanish nodded grimly. The massive serpents had proven surprisingly effective at exploiting weak points in their supposedly impenetrable suits. Even more disturbing was how they seemed to appear from nowhere, their heat signatures masked by the ambient temperature of the water they lurked in. But it wasn't just the predators. The plant life itself seemed to be waging war against them. A research team had been found completely immobilized by something called strangler vines, which had somehow grown through their armor joints in mere hours. Another patrol had walked into a patch of giant stinging nettles, and their suits' air filters had failed to screen out the microscopic barbs, leaving the troops in respiratory distress. "Sir," a panicked voice crackled over the command center speakers. "Something's wrong with Team Delta. They brushed against some kind of flowering tree in their scales. Their scales are dissolving." The botanical database identified it as a species whose sap contained complex alkaloids, chemicals that could break down their biological armor as easily as human-made materials. The plants had been fighting their own chemical warfare for millions of years before the hegemony had even achieved spaceflight. General Vex Moore, his scales now permanently fixed in the gray pallor of defeat, watched as another section of their tactical display went dark. "How many?" he asked quietly. "How many have we lost to these animals?" Zanish consulted his datapad. 300,000 to large predators. Another 250,000 to what the troops are calling small predators, including something called fire ants that can strip a warrior's scales bare in minutes. The plant life has claimed almost as many through various toxic encounters. He paused, checking another figure. And we still have over 1 million incapacitated by disease. A sudden commotion drew their attention to the command center's main viewport. A massive shape moved through the canopy below, a harpy eagle, its wingspan greater than their dropship's auxiliary engines. They watched in horror as it plucked an armored warrior from a patrol route as easily as picking a fruit. "These creatures," Vexmore whispered, "they show no fear of our weapons. They don't recognize us as threats," Zanish explained. "To them, we're just new prey. Their ancestors survived the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Our energy weapons mean nothing to millions of years of evolved hunting instinct." The general's scales rippled with a shudder as they watched the eagle disappear into the canopy with its prize. "And the humans? How do they survive these predators?" "They respect them," Zanish said simply. "They learned long ago that on this world you don't try to dominate nature, you adapt to it." Every piece of their technology, every advancement they've made, came from that understanding. Another emergency signal lit up the display, this time from a unit that had stumbled into a pit of quicksand, while retreating from what they described as a pack of hunting cats. The planet's predators had learned to use the terrain to their advantage, driving their prey into natural traps. "We thought we were invading a primitive world," Zanish continued, watching as more sections of their tactical display went dark. "Instead, we invaded an ecosystem that has been perfecting its defenses since before our species existed. Every plant, every animal, every insect and microbe, they're all part of Earth's immune system. And we," he gestured to the suffering troops around them, "were just another infection for it to eliminate." Through the viewport, they could see the sun setting over the Amazon. In the gathering darkness, millions of predator eyes were opening, ready for another night of hunting. The invasion force had arrived expecting to find primitive prey. Instead, they had become prey themselves, and the night belonged to the hunters. On the 7th day, General Vexmore finally gave the order to retreat. By then, it was far too late. "All units, fall back to extraction points. Emergency evacuation protocols are now in effect." The general's voice cracked as he broadcast the command, his scales now permanently locked in the gray-white of total defeat. "I repeat, all units fall back, sir." The communications officer interrupted. "We're getting no acknowledgement from the ground forces. The electromagnetic interference from the storm systems." He gestured helplessly at the display showing massive lightning storms covering the entire operation zone. Zanish watched from his observation post as nature delivered its final blow to the mighty hegemony invasion force. The paths they had carved through the jungle just days ago had already been reclaimed by vegetation growing at impossible speeds. The landing zones were now swamps or had been buried under mudslides. Navigation systems that relied on stellar positioning were useless under the thick canopy, and the constant electrical storms had rendered their backup systems equally worthless. "Sir, we're getting scattered transmissions," the comm officer reported. "Playing them now," the command center filled with voices of panic and despair. "This is Unit 847. We can't find the extraction point. The jungle, it all looks the same. Our markers are gone." Unit 223 reporting. "The ground is too unstable for the drop ships to land. We need static consume the rest. Anyone receiving this? The vines, they're growing through our armor. They're everywhere. We can't more static." Medical Unit 15. Temperatures rising. Fever spreading through the whole squad. "Can't move, please. Something's out there. We can hear them moving in the dark. Our weapons don't. They just keep coming. One by one." The emergency beacons began to fail. Some lost power as the jungle's relentless humidity finally defeated their sealed power systems. Others simply stopped transmitting as their owners succumbed to disease, predators, or the countless other hazards of Earth's most hostile region. In the command center, General Vexmore had finally collapsed into his control chair, all four eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed their forces literally disappearing from the map. 2.3 million, he whispered. 2.3 million of our finest warriors, the greatest invasion force ever assembled. And we never even saw the enemy. We saw them, Zanish corrected quietly. We just didn't recognize them. Every mosquito carrying malaria, every jaguar hunting in the dark, every vine growing through our armor, every bacterium multiplying in our bodies. These were Earth soldiers, and they fought exactly as they evolved to fight. A massive thunder crack shook the flagship, and another section of their communications grid went dark. Below, they could see the storm-lit jungle stretching to the horizon, a living entity that had simply absorbed their invasion force like countless others before them. The humans, Vexmore turned to Zanish, his voice barely audible. "They knew, didn't they? They knew what would happen to us." "Almost certainly," Zanish nodded. "Their military satellites must have tracked our landing. They could have attacked us at any time. But they knew they didn't need to. They've spent their entire history learning to survive this world. They knew exactly what it would do to us." The general's scales rippled one final time. "Send the retreat signal to any unit still able to receive. Get as many out as we can." But as the hours passed, it became clear that there would be no massive retreat. The few survivors who made it to extraction points arrived changed forever, their bodies ravaged by disease, their scales marked by encounters with Earth's defenders. Most extraction points reported no survivors at all. The greatest invasion force in hegemony history hadn't been defeated by Earth's armies. They had been eliminated by Earth itself, their superior technology and training meaning nothing against a planet that had been killing things since before their species evolved. As night fell again over the Amazon, Zanish noted in his report that out of 2.3 million invasion troops, fewer than 1,000 would return home, and none of them would ever forget the lesson they had learned. On a Deathworld, everything is a weapon. Everything is a soldier. Everything is waiting to kill you. And Earth had been perfecting its defenses for 4 billion years. Official report to the Galactic Hegemony High Command from Zanish, sole surviving senior officer subject. Complete analysis of Earth invasion failure classification. Maximum priority total forces deployed. 2,347,982 total survivors. 842 casualties by category. Disease and infection, 1,123,455. Environmental hazards, 487,644. Predator encounters, 312,777. Equipment failure, 298,234. Other unknown, 125,030 time from initial landing to total force collapse. 7 Earth Days Executive Summary. The invasion of Sol 3, designation, Earth, represents the most catastrophic military failure in hegemony history. This was not, however, a military defeat. We did not lose a war, we failed an evolutionary test. Our forces were not defeated by Earth's humans or their technology. We were eliminated by the planet's basic operating system, an ecosystem that has spent 4 billion years perfecting its defenses against any and all threats. Key findings. 1. Environmental defense systems. The planet employs a layered defense strategy evolved over billions of years. Each organism, from microscopic to massive, serves as part of an interconnected immune system. Our technology proved ineffective against threats that predate our species' existence too. Technological failures. Environmental suits rated for space vacuum failed against simple humidity. Medical systems proved useless against evolved pathogens. Navigation and communication equipment rendered ineffective by natural interference. Weapons had no deterrent effect on native predators. 3. Critical miscalculations. We mistook human technological development patterns for primitive behavior. Their apparent disunity is actually an adaptation strategy. What we saw as unused terrain was actually active defensive territory. We fundamentally misunderstood the relationship between humans and their world. Primary conclusion. Earth is not a planet that hosts life. Earth is a living system that has spent billions of years perfecting its defenses. The humans do not control their world. They have simply learned to survive it. This perhaps makes them more formidable than any technology we possess. Recommendations. 1. Immediate reclassification of Earth from Class 12 Deathworld to Class Omega. Do not approach. 2. Implementation of a minimum 50 light-year quarantine zone. 3. Cessation of all military planning regarding Earth. 4. Consider diplomatic contact only, preferably from orbit. Addendum. 3 Earth days later. The following message was received through our remaining communication relay. Dear Ataka Zanish, the United Earth Defense Council hopes this message finds you well. We noticed your recent military activity in our Amazon region. We're reaching out to inquire if we should prepare armed forces for future incursions, or if letting nature take its course again would be sufficient. We would also like to note that if you had approached diplomatically, we could have recommended several much more hospitable landing zones. The Amazon is lovely this time of year, but it's a bit intense for first-time visitors. Regards, United Earth Defense Council. P.S. We hope your surviving troops received adequate medical treatment for their infections. Jungle rot can be quite persistent. My response was brief. To the United Earth Defense Council, the hegemony has received nature's message with perfect clarity. I would strongly advise against any future military action against your world. The few survivors of our invasion force wake screaming about mosquitoes. I would, however, be open to discussing diplomatic relations. From orbit. Regards, Ataka Zanish. Final personal note. I now understand why humans smile when they say welcome to Earth. It is not a greeting, it is a warning. End report. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.